That was a very nice introduction. Thanks, Ted. And thank you all for coming out tonight. I know this weather was not exactly a wonderful, balmy evening to come out on, so I appreciate all of you being here. And of course, it's always nice to see friendly faces. I have my students here. I have my family here, my wife Dorota, my daughter Isabel, and my son Sam. It's very nice to see you guys here, of course. So I feel relaxed because you're here. I have a short statement I'd like to read to begin. And of course, before I do that, let me just thank Judith Stonehill, who wrote the book, Greenwich Village Stories, where she included 3 of my watercolors in the book that's available outside. And of course for Ted for organizing tonight. And unfortunately, there's no good acronym for the GVSHP, the Greenwich Village Society for Historic Preservation. GVSHP? I don't know. It's too bad, but I'll call it just the Greenwich Village Society during the talk. So just to begin, I'll read the statement and then I'll go through a series of images that I'll talk along with and just wing it. So recently our city has felt an increasingly corporate and anonymous place as big banks and drugstore chains have taken over commercial spaces, and even the proliferating high-end food courts are part of a mauling of New York City. But being here tonight, I'm reminded of the many small intersecting circles the fabric of our lives here are really about. The artists, the writers, photographers, teachers, business people, students, friends, and colleagues who make up a gathering like this. I am here now through Judith Stonehill's mentioning my work to Tom Burchard, who's here tonight, the owner of the Veselka restaurant. 41 years ago, Tom hired me as the night counter man while I was a sophomore at CCNY. And we've been friends ever since. He paid me $4 an hour, which was a lot of money for me at that time. And my studio apartment in a brownstone on 78th and West End Avenue cost all of $157 a month. That studio rent has long vanished, but the long-term friendship remains. And it's these connections that make our city a home. Our neighborhoods remain still many small, interconnected towns to those of us who know and love them. And the city still affords us many, many paths in establishing those kind of deep personal bonds here. I've been drawing and painting continually ever since I was a small child. The positive identity of being an artist was something that was forged for me early on. My first trip to Amsterdam when I was 18 exposed me to many things, but the one that I can remember is Dutch 17th century painting. In the halls of the Rijksmuseum, I discovered an art that was inclusive and accessible. It was filled with great beauty, technique, and depth of feeling. The 17th century Dutch invented secular cityscape painting. Those first bourgeois burghers loved their new city and lined their narrow homes with easel paintings of their town. As I studied and slowly developed, artists such as the romantic painter Caspar David Friedrich and the great photographer of Paris, Eugene Auger, influenced my sensibilities. By the time I earned my MFA from Pratt Institute in 1979, I was painting my first serious watercolors of architectural subjects. For my technique, I studied the early English watercolorists, people like Turner, Cotman, and Bonington, and that's the approach I still use in these paintings today. Let me just wet my whistle. So, as I put together this group of paintings for this evening, I became more and more aware of the society's consistent commitment to challenging the often thoughtless and greed-driven development our city has been experiencing, particularly in residential construction. Many of the scenes I will share with you tonight, in fact, would be unrecognizable or non-existent if not for those efforts. And as someone born and raised here who's been painting our shared built environment for over 40 years, I am keenly aware of the economic forces that pressure this rapid change. As international wealth has poured into the city, it has changed our landscape. Giant retail chains dominate our commercial streets as the shadows of enormous new condominium towers stretch over Central Park, at the sacrifice of the more intimate neighborhoods and the disappearing mom and pop businesses. I lament the challenges my children face in the daunting real estate market. The days of affordable brownstone apartments for young professionals is indeed a distant memory. Of course, it's not all bad, as the great green belt running along the river on Manhattan's west side demonstrates, and Central Park remains a collective oasis, as it has for 150 years. But as these remaining pockets, which represent our shared architectural heritage, become more and more scarce, so the need to assure their protection is more and more acute. Anyone who's had a long-term career recording our city becomes an unintentional documentarian, a result of this rapid and inexorable rebuilding. My own engagement with our city's architecture is not a nostalgic one. I do not see myself as somebody who yearns for an earlier time. Rather, I see these views as an expression of a shared history, of condensed experience and aspirations. Threads that weave together a sense of continuity in a city that is undergoing constant renewal. Even as a child, these older neighborhoods held a compelling romance for me. The older buildings having the mystery of ancient ruins. What things must have happened there, what secrets the walls could tell. What knowledge I have of both art and New York City history is not at all a historian's systematic study of periods. It is very much scattershot. As with both paintings and buildings I have familiarized myself with, it begins with a specific work speaking to me, engaging and intriguing me. That leads to my wanting to understand the circumstance and the context the work was created within. Was the painter successful? How was he or she seen in their own time? Did they enjoy a long life or die young? With the architecture, the questions are: who lived here? Who designed this? When was it built? Knowing these backgrounds humanizes the work and helps enhance our appreciation. It becomes a living, palpable history, not the memorization of names and dates. I remind my students that the great work of the past requires our collaboration to remain relevant. It lives on only in our consciousness. A Rembrandt in a closet moves no one. It only lives through our engagement with it. The paintings I'm about to show you were done in the same technique I've developed over the past several decades. They are all watercolor over graphite on paper. On stretched Arches cold-pressed watercolor paper, I do a hard pencil drawing in 5 or 6H pencil, over which I apply repeated layers of transparent watercolor. Although I work in a variety of sizes, the pieces I will show tonight are mostly my larger work, between 36 by 24 inch verticals and 30 by 50 inch horizontals, and take anywhere from 8 to 16 weeks to complete. So now let's look at a few paintings, and if you have any questions about the technique of my subjects, we can do that afterwards. So, this one you've been staring at for the last half an hour or so is the earliest large painting I did. I chose this one specifically for a few reasons. This is from 1987. It's the Gansevoort Street Market, and this looks almost unrecognizable to anybody who knows this area today. Right? So, this is right before the whole pressure of change started to alter this area forever. I have always found this as one of the most intriguing, the most evocative of kind of the working class old New York that really has disappeared. It was created when the Commissioner's Plan of 1811 established the street grid. So from 14th Street north, that's where the grid took place. Anything south of 14th Street is old New York. That's why Greenwich Village retains the crooked streets. But at 14th Street, right in this area, it just stops. So you have 5 intersecting avenues and streets that form what's really a large piazza and a low-level piazza. So it's really one of the most unique areas in the city. It's all Belgian block streets. They're not called cobblestones, they're Belgian blocks, right? And it still evokes, at this time, you can see, let me see if I have my pointer. There we go. Right? This is Rio Mar. I don't know if any of you remember, it was a great Spanish restaurant, had the strongest sangria in New York. And this is right before, so this is when the area was extremely evocative to me. This is a winter view. But what I've done was some of these areas have a kind of lasting intrigue for me. So this is 10 years later. That was 1987, this is 1997. So you can see the Rio Mar is still there, but already you can see where Pastis is going to be. So the big overhangs of the meat packing places are starting to be renovated into these high-end stores and restaurants, but the Belgian blocks still remain. And what I particularly loved about this painting, they have that wonderful patina on them. So you can see how the white building in the middle picks up the reflection on the street there. So, and then you can't, it's hard to see, but no, let me see. Let's go to the next one. This is 2007. So you can see the Rio Mar is gone. Some of the meatpacking places are gone. On the left is a high-end clothing store. I forget the name of it. There's Pastis. And even now it's 10 years later, almost. So it's almost time for me to try another one. However, between the new hotels and the Whitney Museum edition, the whole scale of this area is dramatically changing. So whether or not I paint it again, I'm debating. I guess I'll be around, so I should do one more. But the scale, and even the Belgian block or cobblestones that you see in the street, what they've done is you can see right there, there's a Ford Escalade coming in. So slowly but surely, they partitioned off this area to kind of control the traffic. So what they've done is they've actually split up this piazza. And I think that's a great loss. There was one of the few real, truly open spaces that we had left. In the 19th century, it was an open-air market. For a long time, there were elevated trains running through it, so it was a logical place between the river and the access to the railroads. It was a logical place for commerce to happen. Things ship in, things ship out. But you can see where Rio Mar was. It's a very high-end wine bar. I think it's changed. So I think actually that's a Serafina now. But I remember my wife and I went there, and we paid, I think, about $20 a piece for a cocktail. And I said we could have had a meal at Rio Mar there for that, right? So anyway, that's one area that I've painted repeatedly. So let's go now. This is an early view of 72nd Street. And you can see my technique has improved a little bit. I think this painting might be from even the early 80s. Might be almost a little more than 30 years old. But you can see I always considered this view the kind of the gateway to the Upper West Side. I know kind of Lincoln Center changed that perception when it was built, but the three main monuments or landmarks in this area, you have the Heinz and Lafarge subway kiosk from 1905. You have the 1928 Central Savings Bank building, which is based on a Renaissance palazzo in Florence. And then you have, of course, the Ansonia, the great 1905 building. That was one of the grandest residential hotels when it opened. And for those of you who like sustainability, it had a farm on the roof. It was the first building in New York that had a farm. 500 chickens, half a dozen goats, ducks, and for some reason a bear. That's what I was reading. So when you lived there, when you first moved in there was a central kitchen downstairs, and then serving kitchens on every floor. So if you were a resident there, they would bring you up your dinner, and they'd have separate serving compartments on every floor that would serve you your meals. So it was a pretty grand residence. I think Stravinsky lived there, a number of notables. But I always loved this kind of the dual perspective of the split of Verdi Square there. So then here's 2006. So I changed the perspective a little bit here, got more of a view of the Central Savings Bank building as it was built. And you can see the Ansonia is undergoing renovation there. And they haven't built, don't think they built a second subway kiosk at that point. But this is a large painting. This is probably 34 by 54 inches. And I did one more version of it recently that is more of an evening view, which is this one. So what I did, this is from last year. So what I did in this one, I pulled the perspective forward. I made the subway kiosk a much more prominent feature here. Because it really is, as the neighborhood changes and more buildings are being built up around it, most of the low buildings are gone now. So right in back of this view there are several new towers. So I made the subway kiosk a much more prominent feature in it and lit it from the interior. So I think that's a much more evocative kind of way of presenting it. And there you have the evening view of the Central Savings Bank again and the Ansonia. This is also very large. This is probably around the same size as the previous one. So then we move to one of my favorite areas, which is down what is now the Municipal Center and the court area, but this is on, it's Moscow and Mulberry Street. So Mulberry Street now is really all that remains of Little Italy. Right? Little Italy at one point was huge. Chinatown was tiny. And everything's been reversed now. So this opened as an Italian-American bank. And it's right on what was, when the 5 Points existed, Mulberry Bend. The most dangerous block that ever existed in the United States. That's where Bandits Roost was, Bottle Alley. It's now Columbus Park. Right? All of that was torn down. This whole area was completely demolished when Jacob Riis published the book How the Other Half Lives, where he featured the 5 Points. So that really led to a big reform in tenement dwellings. And a lot of the 5 Points was torn down then. That's where Columbus Park is now, the Municipal Center. But this is one of the last remaining streets. This was originally called Cross Street. It's now called Moscow Street. And now it's a Chinese funeral parlor. So these things in New York, I'm always fascinated by the reincarnations of these older buildings. But at one point, it was obviously a pretty grand bank for people to go to. And this is one of my favorite streets in Chinatown. It's one of the 3 original streets, Doyers Street. It's a quirky little street. Heinrich Doyers had a distillery somewhere along it and had a bar there, and it just remained. It just got integrated later on. It's Pell and Mott being the other 2 original streets of Chinatown. If you look at this was in the 19th century called the Bloody Angle, because all the Tong gangs had their headquarters there. Now it's a bunch of barber shops, but it was one of the most dangerous corners. There were gang fights all the time there. And if you look, the red building over there down the street, that's the Nam Hua Tea Parlor, which was the first restaurant in New York to offer dim sum. It was opened in about 1920. If you go past that, right there, there is an entrance that goes down into a small shopping arcade in the basement. Along that entrance, there are soldered shut doors. They lead to a series of tunnels that the Tong gangs used to escape the police when they heard the whistles. So the legend, one of the urban legends, is that those tunnels are still there behind those doors. They lead out to Chatham Square. No, I've been trying to find out whether or not there really is some way you could get into them. Do they exist? People have fantasies of like hidden opium dens still being down there. But anyway, it's one of the great New York stories. And let's go to, this is along Broome Street. Broome Street is a wonderful street in that it's a wide street that traverses most of Manhattan all the way east to west. Along Broome Street you have many wonderful older vintage buildings, and this is one of them. This is Engine 55. It was built, it was designed by R.H. Robertson. He was an architect. He did a lot of churches in the city. He did A lot of monuments. This is the only firehouse he ever did. If you look, I don't know, it's hard to see, but the date is 1898. And what does that mark? That dates the incorporation of the 5 boroughs into one unified city. So what happened was in 1898, a whole series of firehouses was constructed. If you walk around the vintage firehouses, Napoleon LeBron and Sons did most of them. R.H. Robertson did this one. And you can see they still take, it's really almost completely intact from when it was built in 1898. And it's a continually service firehouse. Still has a company in it. But I love, I love the fanciful scroll work, the leaf motifs around this. It's a really, really beautiful, evocative building. And of course that red door stands out. This is further west on Broome Street. This is looking down west towards Soho. And again, you see these wonderfully evocative older buildings. This area, you know, Soho has the most cast iron buildings that were built really pre and post Civil War. This is a particularly beautiful building here. I can't remember the name of it offhand, but it's one of these unusual buildings that the plot, the avenue front on Broadway there, is only 3 windows wide. But the length of the building runs the entire avenue. So it's one of these very kind of quirky buildings that has this huge cornice, this small front, and then this very wide take down a full avenue. Let's go to, here we are in the West Village. This is along Greenwich Street. And I love this is kind of aged brickwork with the obvious reworkings, replastering, the different kinds of bricks. You can always tell an older building in New York, an early 19th century building, by these. And you all must know what they are, right? Those are the stars on steel rods that run the length of the wooden floors for support before there was poured concrete used. So whenever you see that, usually that means there's a wooden floor that's supported by these steel rods. And they try to make them fanciful. They intentionally put these kind of very conscious design elements on the caps of them. But I love this building. This building still looks like this. You can walk there. I did this painting maybe 15 years ago now. This building still absolutely looks the same. You have these original columns, the original doorways, but there's something so quirky about them, because look at the position of the windows compared to the doors. So something was rebuilt, something was shifted. The brick changes from the red brick to the orange brick there. So there's some sort of interesting history that went on there, and I love the way the wall expresses that. That's an expression Rick Burns actually taught me, palimpsest, which has become one of my favorite words, which is the rubbing away of layers to reveal older layers. So I love when I find that, the old signs in New York, that kind of quality to the walls. And I'm not adverse to doing a landmark now and then. So here's Roebling's Brooklyn Bridge. And you know, when it was built, it was twice as big as any suspension bridge ever built in 1883. John Roebling had his leg crushed by a ferry when he was working with the engineers along the river. And so his son, Washington, took over the direction of the bridge. He developed Caisson's disease. Caisson's disease was diagnosed based on the construction of this bridge. The caissons there were they dug them by putting a central hole and digging out from the bottom and lowering it. And they had no awareness that the air pressure was going to cause problems for people. So Washington Roebling wound up not being able to work on site. He never actually visited the finished bridge. He never saw it in person. He worked from an apartment with a telescope, talking to the engineers. And his wife basically took over all the practical day-to-day. She would take messages from him to the engineers and back. So she actually learned higher mathematics, helped design the cable system. And amazingly, this bridge, most bridges built at this time, they've been replaced. This is one of the few bridges from this era that has stood up perfectly. Roebling designed it to withstand 6 times the amount of weight that he predicted would cross the bridge at any time. And people didn't believe it would stand. So there's a famous story that P.T. Barnum had a pack of elephants walk across it, so everybody would feel assured that they could cross it. But I love, this view. Most views you see of this take a more frontal view of these big stanchions. But I like this beautiful T and the silhouette that it forms. It's kind of a more elegant way to see the structure. And then here's more of those beautiful walls that I always feel attracted to. The ubiquitous water tank, unique to New York. And in New York, the architecture reflects the nature of the populace. There's 20 different styles of architecture and cornices, and they work, just like the city works. Right? So I always, and when you want to do views that retain the architectural integrity of the original buildings, you go above street level. The street level is where the stores change, they completely renovate things on a continual basis, but when you look up, you can see really what the original building and the architects intended. And here's another one. And this is Broadway and 22nd Street. That's the back of the Fuller building, the Flatiron building. And that's one of the oldest buildings in the area. The large building on the right with the yellow wall is the Mortimer building from 1862. So that's a pre-Civil War building when that neighborhood was the Ladies' Mile, a very high-end, fashionable shopping district. These lower buildings, you can see there was a fire in 1895. A fire destroyed the mansard roof of the building. They added another floor and blocked in the windows, these adjacent windows. So I love that story. I love seeing the tale of those walls. I remember when I took this painting to the gallery I was represented by at the time, he looked at the painting, the owner of the gallery, and he said, "Rick, I can't sell this." And I said, "Why not?" He said, "If you'll excuse me, it's just a fucking wall." To which I said, "Yeah, but it's but a wall, but what a wall." And then that's the Gordon Novelty Company, these 3 buildings. And right now they're doing what they call New York City renovation. As I recall, they've maintained the facades of those buildings, but they're planning to build a tower behind it. So that's architectural preservation, New York style. I threw in a few things just to show you I've done things other than New York, been a few other places. So this is the Quai de Grand Augustin in Paris, which I always love the quays around the Seine. So that painting was done about, maybe also about 12 or 14 years ago now. Then here, it's one of these beautifully evocative streets. Paris is one of the cities that I think is as beautiful in overcast or rainy weather as it is in sunshine. So again, I love the textures and the play of light and the reflective quality of the streets. There's my wife Dorota walking down the block. And this is Rue Jacques Callot, named after a 16th century etcher. This block now looks nothing like this. I visited this block over decades, and it's been completely renovated also. It's all smoothed out. All the stones have been repointed. It doesn't have the same kind of quirky lack of balance to it now. And then one more from Paris this is on the left bank. This place, La Friterie. This is virtually a medieval These two buildings are 1300s. And, you know, I saw it, and it's just, I mean, these roofs, I mean, who lives there? Who's painting in that room? I want to know. And unfortunately now, my daughter actually went to Paris and sent me a photo of this, and it too has been completely homogenized and cleaned up and smoothed out. So one thing you learn about painting these older buildings, if you see them and you love them, do it now. Because you go back a few years later and they're gone. Even in Paris. And then, for just a little additional something, this is Central Park. This is a couple of statues I'm going to show you. This is the Falconer from 1874 by a sculptor named George Simmons. And that's, if you go in the park on 72nd Street, the West Drive, it's harder to see in the summer, but in the winter you can see it right there. Interestingly, all the statues you see in Central Park were added as an afterthought. In the original Olmsted and Vox plans of Central Park, there's only one statue in the original plan, and that's this one, Bethesda Fountain. That was planned at the end of the Poets' Walk, Bethesda Terrace by the lake. It was the first major commission, sculptural commission, ever given to a woman in New York. Emma Stebbins was the sculptor. And the statue's 8 feet high. That's the Angel of the Waters. She holds a lily in her hand, a symbol of purity of water. And what it celebrates is the Croton Aqueduct. Because a big deal in New York in the 19th century was clean water. So in 1842, the Croton Aqueduct opened, and for the first time there was a consistent source of clean water in the city. So that's what a lot of people don't realize that's what the statue actually commemorates. But I think, and personally, I've painted this area maybe 20 or 30 times, and I think really it's one of the most beautiful pieces of park architecture in the world. The whole esplanade, the Poets' Walk, down to the terrace, down to the fountain and across the lake. And I think we're all still incredibly fortunate that we can go and, you know, thanks to the Central Park Conservancy, we can enjoy it as it was originally intended, as people did 150 years ago. So, a little Coney Island thrown in. Coney Island, basically, as we know it, Astroland ended in 2008 officially. There's a major show opening in January. It opens at the Wadsworth Athenaeum. Ted mentioned it, on Coney Island work. It has probably the work of 200 artists in it, including people like Reginald Marsh. And two of my pieces will be included in that show. It's going to be open at Yale, then it's going to go to the San Diego Art Museum, and then the Brooklyn Museum at the end of 2015. So a couple of my Coney Island paintings will be included in that. I did a whole show of Coney Island in 2008, and of course I didn't realize that vision of Coney Island was also about to end, as Luna Park had ended, as Dreamland ended. So Astroland also ended. Cyclone is still there. Nathan's is still there. This is actually a smaller painting. This is more 12 by 18 inches. Something like this is one of my 36 by 24 inch paintings. So that's a smaller one of Nathan's, where I've had many a hot dog. And here is the old Astroland rocket over Gregory and Paul's. It's no longer there. That was originally, in the 60s, that was a ride. It was part of Astroland, and you could go inside it, and it moves around, and you'd see a little film of outer space. You know, so I've never been inside. I would like to go inside. I don't know. I think it still exists somewhere. They sold off a lot of Astroland, though. A lot of these beautiful old things are no longer there. And then, of course, Sandy, in 2012, knocked down a lot of what was along the boardwalk there. And you can see this boardwalk is this beautiful old wood, which they're trying to replace with plastic now. So all the textures all the visuals of this place is really quite different, and in the process of being different than it is what you see here. So this is in Tompkins Square Park. It's the Temperance Fountain, because at that time the person who donated the money to have this built was part of the Moderation Society, because one of the big problems on the Lower East Side then, in the East Village, wasn't a lot of clean water, weren't a lot of water fountains, but everybody was drinking a lot of alcohol. So this was supposedly that's Hebe, the water carrier, based on a sculpture by the Danish sculptor Thorvaldsen in the 19th century. And the statue, the whole fountain really exists almost as it was originally now. It's unusual in that. And you can see I've got some neighborhood types there. And this is the Masoret Synagogue on East 6th Street, which is, I painted, this is probably 2 years old. And I think this is a wonderful, by the way, the Greenwich Village Society of Historic Preservation was really instrumental in seeing that this was landmarked. The Kushner family wanted to tear it down and build a sliver tower, give the synagogue 2 floors, and it's been blocked. There's still a struggle. They still are trying to get a couple of floors built on top. So it is being renovated, but when I found it, it was in this state of what I call benign neglect. Everything's original. The stained glass, the lintels, the doors, they're all as it was built in 1910. And it's a beautiful Palladian facade, isn't it? It's a really wonderful, flat, classical facade. It's the last continually operating tenement synagogue in New York. It's the width of a brownstone. They proliferated at one time, they're all gone. This is the last remaining continually in use one. So I found this a wonderfully expressive, and also, they don't know who the architect was. This beautiful facade, there's no attribution in terms of who designed it. So we're coming towards the end of my slideshow. This is Jefferson Market, of course, built 1874 to 77 by the firm of Withers and Vox. Vox, Central Park designer, collaborated with Olmsted. He couldn't work on this. His partner, Withers, worked on this because he was working on the Museum of Natural History. And if you notice, if you know that building, the museum, they're very similar in the kind of ornamentation and stonework that they employ, right? But I think it's a beautifully intact structure. It's a library now. It was a courthouse when it was built. And that's a view down West 10th Street. And it's really one of the most beautiful and evocative views in the village, I think. Actually, one of my friends here tonight took the photographs that I did this from his roof across the street. So, thank you, Scott. And as a last, there we go. This is a townhouse on West 76th Street, near where I live now. And you can see it too shares with the synagogue. This is one of those buildings that has not yet been renovated. The facade shows its age. And if you know what's going on the Upper West Side, all of these side streets, in fact many on this block of West 76th Street, have reverted to private ownership. They are no longer apartments. They were all split up in the 50s, 60s, 70s. They're all now being bought again as private homes and renovated and completely cleaned up. So it's just interesting to see how these things come full circle. So, but what I loved about this is the same thing about that synagogue, all the original carving. And one of the things I discovered, when you look at these, I mean, can you imagine trying to get a stone cutter to do this kind of work now? Who's going to do that? These were not done from molds. This building, I know from drawing it, was carved. And how do you know? because there is no consistent pattern. When they work from molds, they're always reversing the same mold. So they're identical. And as I was drawing this, I was saying, wait a minute, this leaf is different than that leaf. So I realized probably some older Italian stonecutter did this work. So they put a lot of love and a lot of care into buildings like this. And you know what I try and do when I paint something like this, I try and offset the matte quality of the stone with trying to include a little reflective quality in the glass and the reflection across the street. I also, when I do these facades, if you notice this, well, any of the facades I showed you, this, I don't put them in direct sunlight. And there's a very specific reason, because when you use strong sunlight, you create a kind of formal feeling of light and shadow. And so the painting takes on a more kind of formal quality to it. I want the feeling of the architecture to be prominent. I want the personality of the building to be what you feel. So it's not about a formal play of light and shadow, it's about the building and the personality of the building itself. So that's a very conscious choice I've made in how I paint these. And you can see, same thing there, it's overcast light. So I think actually very quickly I've come through the group of slides I brought. So if anybody would like to ask me something. Yes.
What will determine the size of the painting?
Well, usually these paintings, something like this might be 8 weeks work, 10 weeks work. So it has to be something, when I do the large ones, the smaller ones I don't have as much of either a time or even emotional investment in. The paintings, like a lot of the views I showed you, I've done several views of the same thing because there's a hook for me. There's an intrigue, there's a mystery that I feel from them.